Let's learn how to paint a rose. I hope every beginner tries this one. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was my brushes. We're going to use a number 4 and a number 6 round and a detail brush. And at first I thought I would paint the whole rose using cadmium yellow, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, permanent rose, and sap green. But then I thought to myself, well, everybody has cadmium red and cadmium yellow, but the color that I like to use instead of cadmium yellow, which this is right here, is gamboge, new gamboge or gamboge hue. So I'm mixing the cadmium yellow, and as you can see, it is very opaque. And you can use it, but for some reason I like gamboge. I'm just used to it, new gamboge. And here's cadmium red. Cadmium red, which comes in most of the starter sets, is also very opaque. Not all watercolor is super transparent. Cadmium red and cadmium yellow are opaque, but this new gamboge yellow, I'm going to show you. This is the reason why I use it, is because it's really transparent. So I'm going to show you how to use the colors that I use all the time and the colors that are in starter sets, and I'm going to show you how it doesn't matter. You can just mix them together, and it really depends on what kind of look you want. So I also have alizarin crimson and new gamboge. If I mix them together, I will get the same thing as this cadmium red and cadmium yellow mix. So watch, I'm going to show you before I get started. Most people are going to use cadmium red and cadmium yellow, but look, I'm going to use new gamboge. It's another yellow, but as I hold it over my drawing, you can see new gamboge is more transparent. So the colors can be the same, but it's really the transparency. And something so subtle, if you're just practicing, it doesn't matter, but this is what I tend to use because I usually am doing a little bit more than that. So what I can do here, see that cadmium red? I can take alizarin crimson and I can mix into it that new gamboge, and I can get the same color as cadmium red, but it would be a tiny bit more transparent. So, use whatever you have. If you have cadmium red, use that. If you don't have cadmium red, you can mix alizarin crimson and gamboge hue or new gamboge, and it kind of makes the same thing. The more of the yellow I put in, the more it will look like that cadmium red color. See? So use what you have. If you have cadmium red, use that. If you have alizarin crimson and cadmium yellow or gamboge, you use that. So I'm going to do each petal with a different combination of these colors. So we're going to paint this rose by taking one petal at a time. It seems complicated because there's so many petals, but just like how we drew it out one petal at a time, we're going to paint it one petal at a time. And we are going to use the wet into wet technique within each petal, so the colors can bleed into each other and get that kind of thin papery look of a petal. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint one whole petal with yellow. So I'm going to start with the inside of this one, and it's going to be a wash. So I'm adding some water. It's going to be a light yellow. Now I'm going to take my smaller brush and get the red, and I'm going to, you could use cadmium red or you could use the alizarin crimson and gamboge mix, and I'm just going to take my detail brush and I'm going to just dab the red in, and very lightly, like I'm petting a cat. I'm just going to dab it in and I'm going to let it bleed. I'm starting at the tip of the petal, and I'm bleeding down. Now I'm going to take a little more red and I'm going to make it darker at the top. And now I'm going to take the straight red and I'm going to start going underneath. So this darker area has a little bit less water. It's not a wash and it's not wet into wet. I'm just taking the straight red and I'm painting this so it looks like this is the underneath and it's flipping over. And here I'm taking a little more red and I'm going to put it a little bit darker here because I want it to look like it's flipping, curving over. So I'm putting a little bit darker lines to show how it's curving. Okay, on to the next one. Take your yellow and we're going to do the same thing on the other side, but something a little different we're going to do. So first we're going to paint the whole thing yellow again. Now we're going to take the red and we're going to do a little bit different than we did on the other side. Instead of it being the darkest at the top of the petal, we're going to have it darkest at the bottom where the petal touches the rest of the flower. And that's because the sun is coming from the right, and I'm thinking the sun is coming from the right and it's going to be casting a shadow on that petal. So eventually I'm probably going to be going over it a couple of times because I like to do layering, and I'm going to show you how layering can make some really great effects that show form. So, but this is how we're going to start. We're going to do it darker down here, and it's going to be darker closest to the flower, and it's going to show that the flower petal is bending outward to the left. Okay, 2 down. Let's go on to the third one. Let's go in the middle because the other ones are wet. We can't do anything next to them because they'll bleed into each other. So let's skip around and we'll go to this middle one here. And we're going to make that very dark. Number 1, because it's in the center. And number 2, because the light is coming from the right and the left-hand side is shaded. But before we get going, we're going to do the whole thing with the yellow. You can use cadmium yellow. I'm using the cadmiums here this time. And we're going to paint the whole thing yellow first. So here I'm going to take the red, and now I'm going to put the red as a second layer over that yellow, leaving the tip of that petal yellow and making the whole rest of it red. So with my layering technique, I will, after this is dry, be going over it again with even darker down at the bottom, really to make it look like it's in shadow. But right now I'm going to leave it like that, and I'm going to move up to the upper petals. So as I did before, I'm going to use yellow, but I'm going to use a very washed out yellow because these petals here, they are going to have the most sun on them. So I'm going to do that one yellow, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the alizarin crimson, or actually I might add a little bit of the permanent rose in there. So I can actually mix the permanent rose here with some of the yellow and get a similar color, maybe a little bit more coral looking, just to have a subtle change. You don't have to do that, but I might just want to have a little bit of such a subtle change to make it look like it's a little bit lighter and more, getting more sunlight on it. So I mix that color and I'm gonna dab that in. Gonna just make a little bit more. I need to make sure I have enough here. And I'm just gonna dab it in, wet into wet, because the yellow is still wet. And I'm just gonna dab a little bit at the tip. So it almost looks like the sun, because the sun is on the right hand side from behind. It's kind of showing through a little bit, some of these petals, so that's why it's red around the outside and yellow in the center, because it almost looks like the sun is shining through it. It's a see-through petal. So I guess I'll move down here now. So this petal in the front, it is bending towards me, and this little part on the bottom is the darker part of the petal that has no sun hitting it. So I'm gonna make that a dark red. Now I'm gonna blow dry this to get it all dry. Now green is the complementary color to red, and when you mix them together you can get kind of a brownish color. And I'm gonna mix them together here so you can see it's almost like a beigey brown, depending on how much of each color you mix together. And if you wanted to mix the alizarin crimson with the green, you will get a little bit more of a cooler brown. But either way, we're going to use, see, here's the alizarin crimson with the green. I'm going to show you. It's almost like it gets very dark. So I'm going to use this color here, and I'm going to shade this area. And it might seem really dark, but it will dry with the hairdryer a little bit lighter. But this is dark because it's in shadow. The sun is on the right, but maybe in front of this rose or behind the rose, backlit on the right. So it's coming from that direction. So this part is going to be the darkest. So this is a third coat. We had the yellow, the red, and now I have this darker coat, and it is the shaded area. I'm also going to do my darkest dark in the center of the rose, that little oval that we drew in the center. I'm going to make that very, very dark. So before I go on, I'm going to figure out where else do I want some dark shadow. If the sun is coming from behind the flower to the right, this area here is probably going to be pretty dark, or this petal is going to shade this petal, so there might be some shadow down here. So I'm just putting in a shadow, and notice I'm curving the shadow and it gives the petal form. It looks like it's curved. And I'm probably going to have it dark under here. I'm trying to figure out where is the dark going to go. All this is going to be shaded here. So I'm just kind of putting that in as like a placeholder to remind me that those are where I'm going to have the darkest darks. So let's move on to another petal. I'm going to do the one that's facing me. Now I'm going to start out with the yellow, and I'm going to paint the whole thing yellow. But I want it to be darker than the petal that's next to it, because it's supposed to be in a little bit of shadow since the sunlight is coming from the right side and the back. So I'm going to make this yellow first, and then I'm going to put the red over it, just like I did before, but a little bit more solid red on there, and kind of let it bleed in. Then right on the edge, I'm going to just dab a couple of dabs of the red and skipping an area that's yellow. So it kind of looks like the petal is coming out from behind and then flipping over. So I'm going to do one of these petals up here, and I'm going to use cadmium yellow and cadmium red just to show how I'm using different tubes of paint, but this petal and the one next to it are going to pretty much look very similar. So I'm starting off with the yellow and adding some of the red in it, like that. I'm just going to clean off my brush and just use a damp brush to just blend it in a little bit. Now let me pick another petal to work on. This one is going to be darker underneath. I'm probably going to do a couple coats on this one, but right now I'm just going to do the red on the bottom. Then I'm going to do a quick blow dry. Once it's dry, I can do a second coat on that petal just to make it darker and make it look like it's in shadow. I'm just going to take some of the red and do this whole section so that it looks darker. Just like that. Then clean off my brush and then just blend off the top with that damp brush. So now I'm going to go over the lip of this, just the lip of this petal with a single coat, and you can just see how much the single coat is lighter than a darker coat. And then using the layering technique, I'm going to take some of the green and red mixed, and I'm going to just darken up just at the bottom where these petals are heading into to go behind one of the other petals. There you go, and that's where it's going to be the darkest, in the center of this flower. So just continuing on with that petal, I'm going to put the yellow down first and then put a little bit of red into it. I'm deciding whether I want that petal to have another petal behind it, or bring the petal that is next to it, make it look like it's behind it. So I'm seeing how can I do that. Well, if I take some of the red and I start with a dark red down here and go over the top with a dark red, how can I make it look like it's going behind that petal? So I'm like, how can I do this? So let me blend this in. And maybe, because I want to push and pull, I want to pull that petal I just did forward and push the other petal behind. So I call it my pushing and pull stage. I'm going to get some dark red with not a lot of water, and I'm just going to go behind this petal, making this one bigger, and kind of pushing that petal forward and bringing the other one back. Might look a little dark right now, but I think I'm going to lighten it up and blend it in. But see how if you put the darker behind, all of a sudden that other little petal pushes forward. All right, now I'm going to move on to the left side of the rose, and we're going to do this petal. So I'm going to take some cadmium yellow. I can go a little darker because it is going to be darker eventually on this side. All these petals are going to be a little bit darker. So I am going to go over the whole thing with the yellow, just like that. And then I'm going to take my brush, mix it in the red, and add the red and let it bleed up. I'll go a little bit darker down here, and then I'm going to take that darker red and just do the edge of this petal so it looks like it's kind of curving down. And then I just, with a damp brush, not a wet brush, damp brush, just soften the edge. So now while those petals are drying, I'm going to get my sap green, and I'm just going to go over the stem here with the sap green. And there's two little leaves sticking out. I'm going to go over that. And right underneath, and then the other leaf. And pulling down and flicking at the end. Pulling down and flicking the point. Now, since the light source is from the right and then also like kind of from the back, I'm going to just add a little more dark green along this left side, and then a little bit under the rose where the leaves connect to the towards the rose. Okay, so we still got to finish these petals, and I mean it might take a while, but see how we're doing it petal by petal. Each petal has its own unique look. So now this one is a petal that's curved around the center. So this area here is going to be the darkest. So I'm going to fill it in first with the red as my first coat instead of the yellow. I'm going to just make sure my lip is dabbed out there. And then I'm going to add a darker red where that is going down in towards the center of the flower. Now, of course, there's so many different ways to approach painting a rose and also painting a rose in watercolor. I mean, there's so many different ways. You can have it very loose and very abstract, but this is a more realistic style where we kind of pay attention and give each petal its own personality, let's say. So I have 3 petals here, one stacked up on the other, and I want each one of them to look a little bit different. So this one, right now those 2 look the same. So I have to add some dark in here to show that it's coming out from the center, and it's got a shadow on it from that center area. And then I'm going to add a little dark down here, which will push this one underneath the other 2. The other one, and it'll. Okay, so I really want this bottom petal to look like it's underneath the one above it, and that the one above it has a shadow casting onto this bottom one from the light source. That is to the light is coming from the right and the back, the right and the back. So this light is coming that way, and so over here it's going to be a shadow from that petal onto this petal. And I want this top petal to stand forward. So I took a damp brush, not a wet brush, a damp brush that I dabbed on the paper towel, and I pulled that color out. I'm going to do a little bit here, blending and pulling some color out here too. All right, so now I got to think about what I'm going to do next. I guess I'll go a little darker in here. A little bit darker to really make that petal look like it's curved and it's going down. There's a shadow there. And now I'm going to do little details in the center. So there's like a little bud in the center. So I'm going to do the dark behind the little bud, just so you can kind of see that. And that's just with the darker red mixed with the green, so it made it darker. Now I'm going to just fill in this petal on this side with that yellow. Got a little bit of the red in it, but it's kind of yellowy orange. I'm just going to fill that whole thing in. The petal that's on the bottom here that is facing me, I want it to be a little bit darker because it is, the flower is kind of backlit to the right. So I want to make it darker, but I don't really want it as dark as that center. So instead of adding green to my red, I'm just going to do it the straight red and get it a little bit darker on the edge here, because I want it to stand out and look different from the other petals, but I don't want it, and I don't want it to be too light. So I'm just going to go ahead and blend in this red. And I'm going to add some red into this petal here, close to where it is hitting the other petal in front of it, and kind of just pull it out and blend it up, leaving just the tip there of yellow. Okay, so now I'm going to take some straight alizarin crimson, and I'm gonna, could be alizarin crimson or permanent rose, and I'm gonna just paint in the bud. It looks like it's the same color as the shadows on either side, but it's not. Yeah, that's permanent rose, but you could use alizarin crimson, and just paint those little areas that are in the center. And after it dries, I'm going to paint the rest of that area in with the red and yellow mixture, or a light wash, just going through and filling that whole area in. There you go. Just fill that in with a wash. Good. And with my little detail brush, just connecting that line there, kind of making it look like it's curled up in the center here, and just put a little bit of color in here, just to make it look like almost like a little donut in the center. Now I'm almost finished for today, but I see this petal right here. I really want it to be separate. So I'm going to put darker behind it and push this petal back, pulling the other petal forward more. Maybe when I blue dried it, it lightened up. So this is when I go through my pushing and pulling stage at the end, where I see, okay, what do I want to come forward? What do I want to go back? Well, if I want this petal to look like it's going back underneath the other one, I'm going to add dark. I'm going to add some more red and just blend it up with a damp brush. So it looks like that one's coming. That one's going behind the other one. See? And just a couple more finishing touches, just adding some more dark here. Notice how, see, when I add this dark, all of a sudden that one in front pops forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And I think it was worth it. It makes a difference. Now right here, I feel like there should be a little bit more shadow here on this petal, like right in the center, kind of. And then I'm making some lines. It looks like the curve of the petal. So that looks like that bud is casting a shadow on that petal. And I'm about done. What do you think? Beautiful rose.